and Haudenosaunee Confederacy. May we honor the Indigenous stewards of this land and grow in right relationship with all the Indigenous peoples. Today's event is organized jointly by the CIC National Capital Branch and Canada. The Canadian International Council, or CIC, is a platform for citizens to engage in discussions on international issues. Our mission as an independent, nonpartisan, and charitable membership organization is to involve Canadians in defining our country's place in the world. Canada is an international not-for-profit NGO dedicated to advancing international peace and security through the rostering, rapid mobilization, and mission management of experts committed to international service with the UN, multilateral organizations, NGOs, and government. I'm pleased to welcome you today to this event on careers in international organizations and NGOs. This event is part of CIC National Capital Branch's mentorship program that is generously funded by the RBC Foundation, so we thank them for their support. Our Career Expo series of events aim at providing students and young professionals in Canada with practical advice on how to further their career in the international field. With this, I would stop talking and let our moderator and CIC-Ottawa board member, Ali Tejpar, introduce our panelists.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. I noticed that the participant number is still going up, so we'll welcome people as they trickle in. Very pleased to have an incredible panel here with us today. We have Emilie-Anne Leroux, Information Management Officer at UNICEF. We have Dr. Siham Rayale, Women's Rights Policy and Advocacy Specialist at Oxfam Canada. And we have Will Paterson, Financial Sector Specialist at the World Bank Group. So in terms of the format for today, what I'm going to do is I'm going to turn to each of the panelists to give a bit of a 4 or 5 minute overview of their background, their education, their career path. And then we'll launch into some questions and get to know more about their stories, their journey, and their advice for attendees today. If at any time you have any questions for a panelist, feel free to use the Q&A feature. We'll be drawing from that list as well as a list of questions that we received from attendees beforehand. But without further ado, I'll turn it over to Emilie-Anne to share a little about her background, and then Dr. Rayale, and then Will, before we launch into the Q&As. Emilie-Anne, over to you.
Thanks, Ali. Thanks, Zoe. It's very nice to be able to share my experience with all the people who have decided to attend the conference. So I'm just going to start my timer because sometimes you never know. So as you were mentioning, I'm currently working with UNICEF. It's my 7th year with the UN. And maybe just to rewind, I graduated from my Master's in International Law in 2014. That's from UQAM, Université du Québec à Montréal in Montreal. And then from then I started off with an internship with United Nations Association in Canada. And I can answer some questions on that, but it's been 7 years since then, so they have changed a little bit as well. Basically, that was my kind of starting point. And since then, I've done 8 missions in 7 different countries, as well as in headquarters. I've worked for 4 different UN agencies, so I haven't been kind of pigeonholed in terms of the technical expertise that I have. However, what I'm doing specifically is the expertise, that I've been able to gather over the years. So even though I started with international law in terms of my education, since then what I started to do is really the emergency services, so working in humanitarian response. So my first UN agency that I was most involved with was OCHA, the Office for Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs. And what we do is we coordinate the response based on different sectors of activity. So we're talking earthquakes, hurricanes, crisis or economic crisis. They could be civil crises, different types of crises, basically. And they send us in to coordinate what type of response is being deployed. So OCHA is a little bit at the eye of the hurricane for that. And so they coordinate the clusters between themselves. And we work with the UN agencies that are already in the country, as well as with government. So our main counterpoint in any of these emergency responses is the government. And so, yeah, so when I was working with OCHA, what I was doing is the data analysis part of that. So basically what we're doing is humanitarian needs analysis in order to evaluate and do some advocacy and request funding for different types of emergencies based on actual capacity on the ground or capacity like regionally to deploy locally within the country rapidly. That could be deployment of people or of humanitarian goods. So then I mentioned not only I worked with OCHA, I had the chance to work with UNFPA, which is the organization that is, the UN agency, which is specialized in population and women and children's rights. So that was a really interesting experience. I got to go to Bangladesh, work with the Rohingya Muslims that were displaced in 2017. I was there a year later, so the refugee camp of 700,000 people was already kind of built up, and we were working with 19 women-friendly spaces. And so the data component of that comes because the 19 friendly spaces, women-friendly spaces, we were trying to quantify the qualitative information that was coming out of those 19 women-friendly spaces. And so we were using some technological tools, but at the same time, we also had to figure out, bamboo lodgings and then the monsoon. And so there was a kind of a mix of a lot of different things. And so I was handling a lot of different new pieces of information, but then applying from one mission to the next a little bit, the experience and the knowledge that I gathered. So it's been quite a trip. I'm currently working in Honduras. I got a lot of chance because I speak Spanish. And so, yeah, Venezuela, Ecuador, Honduras, Cuba. So I've been specializing a little bit in Latin America, but who knows where the next mission will be. So that's pretty much it for me.
Thank you, Emilie-Anne. And over to you, Siham.
Hi, everyone. I want to thank Ali for the invitation and for everyone being with us this early evening, late afternoon. So my name is Siham Rayale, and as Ali said, I'm a women's rights policy and advocacy specialist at Oxfam Canada, and my focus areas are on humanitarian emergencies and refugee rights. I'm based in Toronto, or Takaranto, which is the traditional territory of many First Nations, including the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Anishinaabe, the Chippewa, the Haudenosaunee, the Wendat peoples, and is now home to many diverse First Nations, Inuit, and Métis peoples. I've been at Oxfam for about this August will be a year. Prior to that, I was actually teaching at the University of Toronto here in the Department of Women and Gender Studies, as well as African Studies. I have a PhD from SOAS, the School of Oriental and African Studies from the UK, and I'm completing an LLM, Master's in Law and International Law and Human Rights, with a focus on transitional justice in post-conflict settings and environments. Much of my experience working in the field has come from doing research. So my strengths and background is as a research consultant for much of my career. As soon as I finished my PhD, which was in 2015 and feels like ages ago under COVID, as soon as I finished, and during my PhD as well, I was traveling throughout sub-Saharan Africa, working in mainly East Africa, but in immediate post-conflict environments, particularly in the Horn, working with civil society, local civil society organizations, regional civil society organizations, and offering my research skills. And some of that included doing capacity building workshops and facilitations, developing toolkits and workshops around capacity building, and doing needs assessments. Eventually I was doing project and program evaluation for different organizations. And my expertise really lies at the intersection of women, peace, and security, and really finding ways of including women in peace processes and in the immediate post-conflict process. So I have worked in environments that have been incredibly difficult and volatile for different reasons, part of which involves active conflict. So much of my experience has been not only how to navigate these environments, but when to leave. Even as the project is ongoing and even as the requirements of your contract are ongoing. So that's something that definitely I can speak to in any questions that participants might have about, how do you build a career in such incredibly insecure and volatile contexts, but also how do you work with communities that are oftentimes highly mobile and have been, forcibly or immediately displaced. And I think I share in that experience with Emilie. So I'm really looking forward to the conversation and getting to know everybody. Yeah, thanks for the opportunity to connect.
Thanks so much, Siham. Will, over to you.
Thanks so much, Ali. And I'm also very pleased to be with you this evening for the CIC Career Expo. And I think early on in my career, I think I wish I had sought out events like this to understand more about how to embark on an international career path. And most of our time, of course, is devoted to Q&A, but I'll start like the others with a summary of my background and career path. And as Ali mentioned, I'm currently at the World Bank Group based in Washington, D.C., but I'll get into my current role a bit later on. My career path is not straightforward at all. It's a real zigzag, windy road that I'll describe to you. And I had an idea of where I wanted to end up working for the public good in an international organization, but I don't think that I could have predicted where I ended up with the team I'm in right now at the World Bank starting out. But I'll tell you a bit about my studies in case that's of interest, and then I'll get into the career path. So I did my undergraduate degree in international studies and economics at Glendon College of York University, which is a small campus of York that's bilingual. Helped me improve and maintain my French, was something that Emilie had discussed in her presentation, the importance of language. And then went to the London School of Economics for a master's in public policy and public administration, where my thesis was the role of the Rwandan public service in the 1994 genocide. I'll talk a bit about my work with respect to Rwanda a bit later on, but I contemplated a PhD at that point, but decided that a law degree was useful if I wanted to go into advocacy and human rights work. So I pursued my legal studies at McGill, and the McGill program is bilingual. It's a dual degree, both common law and civil law. And this was quite useful for my work later on at the UN, and also my current work at the World Bank with countries who have a civil law tradition. And while at McGill, I pursued an international human rights internship at the UN International Criminal Tribunal for Rwanda, which is the tribunal that was set up after the Rwandan genocide to try those who are accused of being most responsible for the genocide. And this ended up being valuable later on, as I'll describe. So starting out in the legal working world, I took a total left turn and decided that a good training for me would be in corporate law. So I worked for a number of years as a corporate lawyer in capital markets and insolvency at Clifford Chance in London, England, which is a big international law firm. And I was there during the 2008 global financial crisis. So there were many innovative things happening. And the years I spent with really long hours at the firm turned out, I think, to be really good training subsequently for my legal work. And a lot of international organizations do like you to already have some experience in your area and training before you join. And I learned that later on. We can discuss that in the Q&A. So I knew that my time at the law firm would be temporary, and I ultimately wanted to go back into the public service. So I had a long-standing interest in the Rwandan genocide and the situation surrounding it. So I applied for a staff position at the UN International Criminal Tribunal for Rwanda and took a leave of absence from my firm and became the legal and policy advisor to the president of the tribunal, actually to two presidents, and worked I was based in Arusha, Tanzania, which is an amazing country. And really with the president, I was involved in advising him on relations with countries, internal strategy, legal decisions. It was a fascinating position. And it was really a dream job. But I decided to come back to Canada. Sorry, Ali, I know I have 1 minute left, but I may go a little bit over because as you see, it is a zigzag path. And the tribunal was winding down because it was an ad hoc tribunal. So I looked back to Canada for my next opportunity to come back home for a little bit, which was important to me. And I returned to Canada through something called the Recruitment of Policy Leaders Program, which brings Canadians with specialized education experience back into the federal public service in a mid to senior level role. And you can be placed in almost any federal department in a policy role. And the government, once you're admitted, brings you to Ottawa to meet with departments and also provides you with a mentor. I ended up working at the Canadian Department of Finance in the financial sector area, working back on financial sector issues like I did at Clifford Chance. So coming back to that, and after 3 years there, I really missed my work in international public service. So got a short-term consultancy with the World Bank in DC with the team I'm in now. But those short-term positions are quite tenuous and difficult to maintain. So after a bit, I ended up in a staff position at the European Bank for Reconstruction and Development in London, in the Office of the General Counsel. So going back to more of a legal position. And within a few years, my team at the World Bank had an opening for a full-time staff position. I don't think that had come up for 7 years before then. So it takes a long time to get these staff positions. And I was able to rejoin my team, which is a team that focuses on insolvency and debt resolution. So helping countries to improve their insolvency, domestic insolvency frameworks to improve their access to finance and financial inclusion. And the World Bank, just in case people don't know, the mission is really a world free of poverty. And we work with developing countries around the world, providing lending and also financial and technical assistance in a wide range of areas, from healthcare to financial sector, which I work in. And I work mainly in sub-Saharan Africa, but we're a small team of 5 people. Right now we have projects in 50 countries. So I work mainly in sub-Saharan Africa, but all around the world if required. Anyway, that's a lot of information. I hope it was useful, and I'm looking forward to and happy to take questions. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Paul. So I guess with that, we'll jump right into the questions here. And so I see that there's a lot of questions about education. So I guess the first question here is, are there any particular degrees or programs that the 3 of you would recommend to students or young professionals aspiring to work at an international organization or NGO? So the floor is yours. Whoever wants to jump in first.
I mean, I can take a first go at answering the question. I mean, I wouldn't necessarily. It depends on, because international organizations have such different roles. It really depends on what role you're interested in the future. And really, I would say that almost any degree or any area is required in an international organization. It does help, I think, to have. I started out with a bachelor's in international studies, and that really helped me, I think, to understand the role of international organizations and understand the world a bit more than I would have without that kind of education. But to me, I think the key is to do something that you're really passionate about, and if you're passionate about it, there's definitely going to be a space for you in an international organization that deals with that particular issue, because there's so many issues that international organizations deal with.
Thanks. Well, Siham, and while I'm asking, on top of educational requirements or degrees, anything about languages as well, whether you feel that's a requirement or whether there's any specific languages that you think make you more competitive as a candidate?
So I don't speak French, so I'm going to let Emilie speak to that because she has an impressive background in languages. But to complement Will's comments, so yes, I think if you do have, your undergraduate degree can be anything, really and truly. You could be, a statistician, you could have a statistics undergraduate degree if you felt like it. And I think the important thing is if you have a real keen interest in international affairs, whether that's, global development, international law, really environmental studies, and that includes environmental science. I think what's really great about higher education today is that there are certificates that you can take both from outside of the university and college environment, but also within it to help you specialize and really kind of focus on issue areas that are really you're really keen about. Some of that is area studies. So you might just have a keen interest in Southeast Asian studies. Some of that might include language, and that in and of itself is really important. And other times that just might include issue areas. So, at York University, they have a certificate in refugee and forced displacement, right? And I know that the University of Ottawa has that as well. So I think, you know, your experiences are really what I have found bring you to where you are. And your keen interest will continue to evolve and drive, you know, the choices that you make. And part of those choices include the issue areas that you want to inform and learn about. As an educator, because prior to coming to Oxfam, and I think throughout, since I got my PhD, I've really found a way to maintain a relationship with, you know, with universities, and have continued to teach, including teaching in the Horn of Africa and in East Africa in general. You know, so much of what, sometimes we have a tendency to pack degrees on top, and to kind of create this very lovely and neat package, which is still, you know, it's valuable. Get the degrees that you're really passionate about. But I think, you know, to say that there's experience, and experience oftentimes really is your best teacher. And if you have an opportunity to do some kind of certificate or other professional development course or program, and you can find a way to fit it in, that sometimes can be much more valuable than what you might be learning in classrooms. So over to my colleague, Emilie.
Sure, thanks, Siham. For the language, maybe I'll get back to that, but I guess the only thing I would add is what I've noticed, at least in the humanitarian response sector, is rather than looking at what degree should you take, it's kind of the economic analysis of what are they looking for, or what is the industry looking for? And I can tell you that if you're a nutritionist or a water engineer and you want to go work for the humanitarian sector, instantly you're good, we'll plug you in. It's so some of the technical fields, there's a lot of need for that, and there's a kind of a cylindrical way of looking at things. And so we'll study international studies, and I did international law, and I think, you know, it comes from that desire of looking beyond our world and all that. But at the same time, some of those jobs that can seem more local, when those are the most, you know, that are looking for. One of my friends works for Télécommunications Sans Frontières, so they're restoring internet and networks after earthquakes and stuff, but he could be doing IT here, but for example, he's going to go do IT in an earthquake affected area. So that, I think that adds on to, I guess, what Siham and Will were saying, is find something that you really enjoy and that you really want to look for. Like international studies is something, but then you have to go get another technical skill. Statistics is great also for that one. For the language, I'm gonna say again that it's more of a question of, I'm lucky because of course I was born into a bilingual household, so I learned the French, and then the Spanish was easy, but I did make a grave mistake that all of my undergraduate, I studied Chinese, which was fantastic. Everyone should learn Chinese, it's great. There's not a lot of international humanitarian jobs related to that, because they're not really, there's not really a lack of people who speak Chinese in that sector. Not yet anyways, maybe in the World Bank. I'll ask Will a little bit later on. But I think, you know, for those who are looking for maybe a career specifically in the humanitarian, French unfortunately remains a really, you know, easy way in. Spanish, we're always desperate for people who speak Spanish and who have the capacity. I'm looking for a coordinator right now in Honduras kind of thing, because there's a kind of a gap in people who have that technical knowledge as well as the language skills. So it's more, I think, that if you only have one language, it's like an additional obstacle, and so it can be very discouraging when that's the blocking point, even if you have all this great knowledge and technical skills to give. So
thanks so much, Emilie-Anne. Our next question here, and it's related. Any advice on applying for a job or getting your foot in the door with your organization? And I guess as another quick tack on to that question is, you know, in terms of, you know, doing your education, do you recommend going right to graduate studies, or are you able to get your foot in the door without having a master's nowadays? I guess we'll start with Siham.
So to the second question about do you need to go right into graduate studies, if you feel like it. I think so much of this is driven by interest, opportunity, but also your circumstances, right? There's plenty of people that can't afford to take time off and, you know, get an internship somewhere in Geneva, because, you know, back in the day, I don't know if Geneva is still a thing, right? You guys can tell me, but You know, there was such a drive when I was in my undergrad to get that internship to Geneva. It didn't matter what international institution that you were working for, but you know, there's the financial means. There's really like structural barriers that can prevent you from really fulfilling the things that you want to fulfill. If that's you know, if that's an actual issue for you. And for other people, you know, they're interested in graduate studies because, you know, that one educator, you know, really drove their interest in a particular issue surrounding international affairs. It was that one course, and that might be the path that they want to take. And for others, it's about time, right? It's really about, well, I know I want to get a law degree. I don't want to be in school forever, so I'm going to go get a law degree. And there's practical and rational considerations to do that. So if you feel like it, you should do it. And I think be comforted in knowing that, you know, you will be able to, as I think our colleague Will has pointed out, some things are straightforward and some things take you forward and backwards and round, and it can still be a very fulfilling experience. So that's that. What was the first question? I'm so sorry.
No, the first, I'm sorry for asking all these questions all at once, but the question was essentially, so this question is, how do you get your foot in the door at Oxfam, at other NGOs, at other international organizations?
Right. So I think it goes back to what Emilie had said about ensuring that you have the right qualifications and the right skills, right? So, you know, if you don't speak French and you apply for a job where it's a bilingual position, that's not helpful and very likely not going to help you keep that job. But if, you know, so making sure that you have the right credentials that they're asking for, but also the right experience, right? That's really critical. So fulfilling, you know, just whatever the job specifications are. And then I think the other bit is, and now it's been made more easy, is to be able to do that outreach, you know, send that email, send that message through LinkedIn, connect with folks through Facebook, interact with them on Twitter, consider, you know, if they happen to be someone that's very public facing that presents ideas that you're really interested in, comment and have that conversation, and, you know, send that message. And that before you could only, I'm aging myself, but I promise I'm a millennial. You know, before you could only, we sent emails, right? Or had cold calls, but now there's, you know, a lot of these social media platforms are open for use, and still people are very, very, very accessible. And are really excited when people reach out in these ways. Even if they can't help you, they'll point you to someone who can, right? And you never lose anything by having a conversation like that. So, yeah.
Thanks, Siham. Emilie-Anne, any advice on getting your foot in the door and about whether to take a break between your undergrad and graduate studies?
Oh, I really hesitated about that one. I'm going to agree with Siham that it really depends on kind of where you are in your life. I jumped straight into it because I had an undergrad in history, and as fascinating as it is, I didn't find it to be particularly operationally useful. So I was kind of like, okay, what can we do with this now? But if you're continuing something that you were doing in your undergrad, then I think it can be worthwhile. Honestly, if you have, like Siham was saying, the time to go get the practical experience before getting your master's degree, I see a lot of value in that. But it takes a lot of, you know, lining up quite a few circumstances. As for getting your foot in the door, I have to say that I'm absolutely guilty of the stars aligning, because I was in Nepal in 2015 when there's the earthquake. And so I was just kind of there, and we had to take shelter on the floor of the UNICEF building. And then those, what I still see as kind of superhero, real life superheroes, came in as everyone was fleeing the country. They flew in, and with their big boxes of things to help initially, the emergency rescue teams and the emergency medical teams, and they were flying in, and I saw them coming in, and I was like, wow, what is this? This is so cool. And that's a hard thing to replicate. So I'm not going to give you the advice of flying in when there's the next earthquake. I got my first internship with UNAC, as I was mentioning earlier, and I took a look at their website, and I don't know that they still offer these internships. And so on top of that, I'm going to say that it was during the Harper era. So I'm going to age myself as well a little bit. And I had to pay to get into that internship. So not only was it not paid, I had to pay for the flight, the insurance, you know, possibly visa, whatever, vaccines. I had to pay just for the right to participate. And at the time it was $2,500. It was, you know, I was working full time, I was studying full time. So I have the luck of having that energy to do both at the same time, but it's not something that's a given, and it was a privilege to get to do it. But I still think that, I don't know, it was a difficult internship. So I think there's other UN internship types. But unfortunately, the type of work that I do with Canada right now, as well as, I don't know if anyone's ever stumbled upon the UN volunteers, they're really looking for people with experience, because they're looking justement not to have to do that initial kind of like, are you really able to, you know, put in the work effort? Do you have the collaboration, the compatibility, that kind of like, the first work years are a little bit difficult. And so they're looking for people with experience. And so UNVs are not really, but it's great because it's paid. It's a volunteer position, but it's paid because there's a recognition of that experience. And then Siham, you were talking about the internships. The internships, not paid, no experience, but also very difficult to get into. So yeah, I would say like the main advice is do look through all the websites, look at what type of profiles they're looking for, skills, but also just the themes.
Thanks, Emilie-Anne. Will?
Yes, just a bit to add to that, because that's all very good advice, I think. I think I would just say to kind of look for opportunities. I know for me, the first major opportunity I had was when I was in law school, this human rights internship, which was fully funded by McGill. So I was able to get funding for the summer to go to work at the UN tribunal, and that was an application process, and that kind of got my foot in the door, gave me some experience in international organization, and also provided me with the contacts, which networking, of course, is extremely important, and keeping up your contacts as well, even if you're moving around, leaving on a good note, and keeping up your contacts, checking in on people, I think is really important. The other thing I would say is opportunities, you know, like CIC and other conferences and events where you can go when COVID is under control, go in person, and meet up with people and have a coffee and connect, and try and find other Canadians at international organizations too. I mean, use those those connections and reach out to people. I think you'd be surprised at how open people are to talking to you through LinkedIn. I've got many requests for connections, and I always respond. I always make time for the people. So I think that you know, you use all those means, and it's a good method to kind of get your foot in the door and understand a bit more about the rules that are available in international organizations. And after having spoken to someone, I mean, I got my short-term consultancy at the World Bank through a bunch of networking, and someone just thought, oh, I know someone who you should speak to based on your experience, and then I got connected to someone. So I think that happens to a lot of people.
Thank you. And I think Siham wants to jump in here.
Just a really more compliment than anything else. And I can't say this enough now, is more often than not, we feel like when we're at the start of any career, and I started off as an intern at Plan Canada. So let me put that in there because we're talking about internships. But to start off, you are your best advocate, and oftentimes there's a little bit of entrepreneurial spirit that has to go along with really advocating for yourself. I don't like the word selling yourself, because you're not a commodity, right? You have skills, you have ideas, you have lived experience in a reality that's very, very valuable that can be commodified, which is fine. Everyone works for a wage, right? But oftentimes it really is just, you know, seeking out the networks that you have idealized, right? And really modeling your career or your interests as you start off from someone that you admire, and really kind of, you know, just reaching out to them, as Will said. You know, he's kind enough to connect, right? And I've got such an impressive resume and CV, but you know, we're all here in this environment and really demystifying many of these processes. So it can be very difficult at the very beginning to really say, what are the right words? How do I frame what I'm doing? But, you know, a bit of luck, a bit of authenticity, and a bit of that entrepreneurial spirit to let people know I'm offering something, but I want something back, which is that experience, those credentials, that connection. Sometimes you just want to connect with people. And I think that's really valuable, but I also understand very difficult to commodify and to say, I talked to this person, therefore I got a job, right? And sometimes it doesn't work like that, but that attitude and that spirit is, really, it is the kind that draws people to you.
Totally. No, and I can say that I'm guilty of that as well, because I mean, when I was looking at the Recruitment and Policy Leaders program, Will was on my radar as someone with a law background, RPL, working with the government. So I messaged him on LinkedIn. I said, Will, can we have a chat? So it works. It's good. I think we all learn from each other, and we're all really committed to paying it forward. Another question here. What does a typical career advancement or trajectory look like in an international organization or an NGO? And again, whoever wants to jump in, feel free to jump in first. I can also name one of you. So
I can tell a small maybe anecdote because Will was mentioning that before you got your current permanent, semi-permanent, anyways, your full-time
term staff position.
Thank you. Staff position, right.
Yeah.
Until you were able to have that opening, it was 7 years. But that's, I guess, with headquarters in Washington, as you were mentioning, right? Because one of the things I've been noticing at the UN is the further afield you go, kind of the more likely that the doors will open up. And so I had only had about 3 years of experience when I was offered a full-term 2-year contract with UNFPA, because they really liked the work I was doing, because you're there, you're kind of showing your grit and your capacity on the floor. But it's through doing these shorter internships and smaller contracts that I even got the chance to get that exposure. But once again, that wasn't even in the capital. And this is another question I think in the list for eventually, and we were talking about work-life balance, and the location right next to the refugee camps was very difficult for me, to be completely honest. We were not allowed out after 8 p.m. So curfew is not new for me. Like, COVID is great, but I've been doing this, right? So we weren't allowed out after 8 p.m. And then there was a really big cultural shift for me to be in Bangladesh, but not in the capital. Like, I was in a smaller city, town even. I couldn't even go to the market without the harassment, and I was groped, for example. Like, so there's all these different things. And so I was like, 3 months, great learning experience. I will remember it until it's really the mission that stood out for me, like one of the top. But pondering a 2-year contract in that one little city, I was like, yes, I could do great things, but this is not where I am right now. And so in terms of advancement, there was that possibility. And so I think going directly into like the deep field is a great way to do so, but it was not for me personally. That's one pathway.
Will?
Yeah. I mean, I would say also that field experience is really good, and also having that field experience, I think, is really important for people who want to be in HQ eventually of these organizations, because they really do look for the field experience. I think also just and it's easier said than done in many cases, but being able to take some risks, and if you can take the 1-year contract or the 2-year contract to kind of build the experience, because that's what, again, will give you the network and the experience that others are looking for to hire you on in a more permanent way. And I mean, that's how I kind of had to. I mean, I'd been a practicing lawyer for many years and took a short-term consultancy contract at the World Bank to be able to have that experience. Not everyone feels comfortable doing that. I understand that, and it's again a tenuous position. But if you can, especially early on in your career, take some risks and take those shorter term positions, then I think that really helps you to build this kind of CV that people are looking for later on.
Thanks, Siham?
Yeah, I mean, I would largely agree with what my colleagues have said. And I think just to reiterate that these issues about access, right? Access are also connected to privilege, right? So it is a privilege to be sitting here and having this conversation with all of you, and to have had all the experience that I have had and managed to have had. But as Emilie-Anne had said, there's challenges as well. Part of your challenges in being able to access the right networks are going to be, you know, are you willing to fly out at the drop of a hat in very dangerous environments? That might not be possible for you. You know, are you willing to be able to, you know, have your movements limited because you're in a disaster area, speaking of humanitarian emergencies, and that can take a toll on your mental health. And years of doing that might not be what you had envisioned or what works out for you. So I think in terms of access, it's very difficult to it's very difficult to give a typical path to how to get that internship, that ideal job. And fundamentally, it's not your fault, right? Unfortunately, I grew up in the Harper era too. And I graduated from my undergrad as soon as the 2008 recession hit, which was it was a terrible time to be doing any kind of social science degree because you couldn't really market so-called technical skills. So, you know, you are taking those short-term contracts and hoping that that contract gets extended and hoping that the next contract gets extended. When I was doing my PhD, I had partial funding. So I was doing a lot of research, just to give so how I got here, I was doing a lot of research consultancies, including a few with the World Bank. But that was also right time, right place, as Emilie-Anne said. So that wasn't something that could be I could predict, but I saw an opportunity. I tried to take advantage of it, and I consistently tried to market the skills that I did have to the best of my ability. So I think it's recognizing that there are limitations and barriers that are outside of your control. But I also think that as an early career individual, you know, whether you're still in pursuing your higher education degree, in graduate school, have just finished, etc. You know, I think making sure that you're investing in that time period and really figuring out, looking up the places that you think you want to be at and potentially want to be at, and having conversations with people, you know, that you believe can help you network, is really valuable to kind of filtering out what it is that you might not really be interested in, because taking an opportunity for the sake of taking an opportunity might be your reality, and you might have to do that, and you should. No, you know, opportunities lead to other opportunities, but there's also, if you have the time, if you have the patience, if you have the ability, there's also a value in really asking more questions, including going to organizations. I saw a question in the Q&A about inclusion. It's also about going to organizations and individuals and asking about their policies around diversity, equity, and inclusion, right? To get an understanding of what their hiring practices are like. Oftentimes you get hired and these things become demystified. Fine, great. But if it's not where you really want to be and it's an opportunity for the sake of an opportunity, you can ask these questions and really start tailoring the space to your needs, and start tailoring your search to your needs.
If I could just add something to that as well, I think that you know, something that I learned on the career path is that, and seeing from other people as well, is that short-term positions are great, and it's great to get your foot in the door, but they're not great to continue on with one short-term position after the next and not knowing where you're going. So I think for me and for others who I've spoken to, it's important to kind of have in mind when you're gonna kind of stop on the kind of short-term wheel and get off and try and find something more permanent, even if it's not in the international space, because I think a lot of people end up finding themselves on this pathway of just short-term contracts, and that can be, I mean, for some people it's great, but for many people it comes without a lot of benefits, and it can be very difficult to live year to year on those kinds of short-term contracts.
Emilie-Anne, I see you nodding along. Is there anything you want to add on that one before we jump to the next question?
No, it's just really interesting. I agree with what Will is saying. It was just reflecting upon kind of how that's done in the humanitarian field. Because, like, I mean, we're always doing disaster response, although there's always a core of some of my colleagues who are there to do the whole cycle of like preparedness, response, and then the after study. And then so there are that core of people who get deployed, whether for regional or headquarters. But yeah, it's there's definitely different pathways. Yeah.
Great. So our next question here, and it's related to what we've heard. I guess, what do you wish you had known about the field or the organization you're in before you started? Any takers?
So that's really difficult to answer. Go on, Emilie-Anne.
No, you go ahead, Siham.
No, I think that's very difficult to answer simply because so much of my life experiences have informed my choice to work here and my desire to apply when the opportunity presented itself. So I think when I think about my career trajectory and the span of my career over the last 12, 13 years, I would think, sometimes I think, what would I tell myself right after undergrad? What would I tell myself after my PhD? What would I tell myself? Because I came back to Canada a couple of years ago. So at different points, I told myself something a little different. And I think the consistent thread has always been, you know, that you are your own expert, right? Whatever expertise that you think that you need, you probably have, unless it's a very technical expertise, right? I'm not a statistician, and I admire statisticians, so that's different. But certainly just apply, reach out, connect, and see where that takes you. I wish I had done more. I wish I had done that more often, without having to tag it to the immediate need to find a new job, like Will said, because your short-term contract was ending.
Thank you. Emilie-Anne?
In regards to your question, like Sam said, I think it's very difficult. It's definitely personal. I'm going to say that I think I learned more about myself than I did, even though I got, such a chance to learn a lot about the international organizations and the countries I lived in. But I think I myself was transformed more by these experiences. And then so it's hard to kind of reimagine what would I tell myself 7 years ago about this whole entire span that I've been on. But then, I was thinking about, a lot of people started asking me as soon as I was working for the UN, like, oh wow, how do I get in? And or conversely, a lot of people were saying, oh well, the UN, they're kind of controversial. And then so there's that kind of negative aspect. And my takeaway that has remained true regardless of which country or which organization I was within, and I've been in some that were not my favorite, so it's been really different. But in all the contexts that I've been in, there's always been at least one or two persons who inspired me by their real like devotion to the mission and the values and the goals of the UN. I'm still fascinated, and I'm really grateful that the UN even exists. I think it still blows my mind that all these countries that are fighting on so many aspects, but then that there was this kind of communal will at some point to create something that is beyond state sovereignty. And then so kind of like just that, tying that into some individuals who uphold those morals and those values and who really push for it, who advocate. I think I've been lucky enough to have enough of those. I wouldn't say necessarily mentors, but they are the people who kind of keep me inspired to keep doing what I'm doing. I don't know if that really answers the question. That's my takeaway.
Thanks, Emilie-Anne.
I would say something very similar. I think it's, in all these organizations, you find all sorts of different people, but finding the people who inspire you and who are there for good, I think is a way to propel yourself forward, because there'll be, in an international career, there'll be a lot of very difficult challenges that you face. And Siham talked a little bit about, those, and also Emilie-Anne talked about a little bit about those challenges, including, personal safety challenges, lots of different challenges that you may face in international career, and being able to find the people who can help you get through those, I think, is extremely important, and to reach out to those people. And I wish I had done that a bit more beginning in my career. And in my particular circumstances, I'm gay, and you know, moving to a country where I had to go back in the closet was very hard for me. And you know, I thought about that a little bit before making the move, but I didn't know what it was going to be like until I did, and it ended up being very hard. Um, you know, finding those people who can help you through those hard times, I think, is really important.
Thanks. I think we have time for about 2 more questions, 10 minutes left. I guess, what do you see as the major issues or trends in the field today or over the next coming years in your organization? I see Emilie-Anne thinking. Anyone want to jump in here first?
I'm going to jump in really quickly just because I was working on this morning. So Emilie-Anne will be familiar with this as well, because the humanitarian sector is undergoing its, you know, grand bargain review. You know, part of the post-COVID environment. So what's the post-COVID environment going to look like for the humanitarian sector? And particularly, you know, issues around international assistance and how much of that might be limited to, you know, communities and environments where already assistance was badly needed, and ensuring that, you know, the humanitarian sector isn't decimated in a post-COVID context, when we know that a lot of nations are going to be looking inward to strengthen, you know, their economic, infrastructures. So oftentimes that means I'm lobbying my government, the Canadian government, to push for expanded debt relief. I'm looking at you, Will. But also trying to maintain and really bolster that international assistance budget to, you know, make sure that people that are already falling through the cracks aren't going to be, you know, these emergencies in these environments aren't further decimated by a lack of support. So yeah, that comes top of mind just because I was working on that this morning.
For me, COVID as well. I mean, I work in the insolvency space, and so the lockdowns have created a potential for a huge number of insolvencies and a lot of financial distress. So that takes up a lot of my time, 14 hours a day right now of my time. But beyond that, of course, climate is extremely important and something that we're working on a lot at the bank. So those 2 areas are among many areas that, I mean, the bank works on every area that a public service would work on, but those 2 areas in particular.
Emilie-Anne?
Maybe just, I totally agree with Siham. Thanks for bringing that up. And you were wondering also about the internships in Geneva. I believe that some of the UN headquarters in Geneva have moved to Istanbul, which is also a fantastic city. So maybe the internships can be elsewhere. But anyways, to come back to you know, the humanitarian response, they've been struggling for the past few years. And I think the UN agencies such as WHO has never gotten as much media attention, obviously, as since COVID. COVAX was a bit of a, I don't want to say a failure, but it was not the success that it should have been, that it could have been. And UNICEF has never been stronger in their technical capacity to monitor and to respond quickly. They've got, you know, they're catching up to WFP in terms of logistics and stuff. So there's maybe a shifting away from the hyper coordinated humanitarian response that we saw like 5-10 years ago, but that might be just my very small pigeonhole of a vision. The one positive aspect that I will say is in my recent information management working group meeting in Honduras, we were talking about and I'm going to struggle with the vocabulary here, but because usually we have to disaggregate data by sex and age, so gender and age, sex and age disaggregated data. But we had a whole panel discussion with an expert who was explaining to us how can we integrate alternative genders or third genders, and what do we do when the country itself is not monitoring different genders within their own statistics and stuff. So how do we make sure that we're not invisibilizing, I don't know if that's a word in English, we're not making people invisible by refusing to recognize their gender. So how do we make sure that the data doesn't ignore them, basically? So I thought that was pretty cool. I have to do more research on it, as you can see.
And if I can add just one thing, because I saw in the chat someone said they've applied for so many jobs and haven't received a response. I think something also that I wish I'd known starting out is, I also applied for so many different positions and didn't hear anything. I mean, dozens and dozens and dozens of positions, but you just have to keep going and keep trying. I think that's another message that I would have.
Well, I think that takes us to our last question for today. And so this is a question that I love asking when I'm, having virtual coffees or in-person coffees, but, what's one piece of advice, knowing what you know now, what is one piece of advice you wish you could tell, your undergrad self?
So I thought I wanted a law degree right after my undergrad, and I didn't get it then. And I always wondered, should I have done it then? And then I kind of came around to it. So I wish I had just told myself to relax. Yeah.
Well, Emilie-Anne?
I think similar to me. I think I stressed out a lot about the exact career path and how to get there. But I mean, in the end, I think I kept doing things that I enjoyed and I was passionate about, and then I ended up in a role that I really enjoy and is great. So I wouldn't, as long as you're on that path and have an idea of where you want to go, and are happy and passionate about what you're doing, then that's the advice I would give to my younger self.
And Emilie-Anne?
I'm really struggling with this. I got to be honest. My college degree was in music, so I really didn't know where I was going. So the only advice that I would give myself was like, buckle up. It's going to be a hell of a ride. But I mean, obviously, I'm not saying that I didn't have to go through all of the applications and knock on the doors and all that. But I think proactivity, constant proactivity, and learning what I can contribute to whatever the project is something that I developed over time. I wasn't necessarily very proactive as a young 20-year-old. So be proactive.
And the other thing I would say, if I can add a last comment, is along the way, people will tell you can't do something, or what your goal is can't be done. I was told that a number of times, and you just have to kind of try and believe in yourself and go towards that goal.
Thanks, Will. And thanks, Siham, and thanks, Emilie-Anne. I think the one thing that I've heard, the consistent messaging, is keep applying. Apply, leave no stone unturned. Network, put yourself out there, because we all face a lot of no's, a lot of rejections, but it's just about, picking yourself up, putting in one more application, because all you need is one yes to open the door and get your career going. So with that, again, I wanted to thank the three of you for taking the time to chat. It was wonderful to get your insights, your perspectives, hear about your career journeys, your pathway. And thank you to our participants. It was wonderful connecting with all of you. I hope you got something out of this. I'm going to make a plug here for the Canadian International Council. If you're interested in future CIC events, please do join us. It's a network of engaged professionals in foreign policy, security and defense, and Canadian politics. We host regular events like this all the time, and one of our big focuses is really focusing on youth and young professionals, and hosting events like these to better equip you, so that, like Will said, we can help equip you with what we wish we had back when we were an undergrad. So I'll put a link there in the chat here. That's a link to become a member. And the final thing I'll say is that we are looking for a mentorship coordinator. So if you're looking to get some board experience, if you want to join the CIC, the National Capital branch here in Ottawa is looking for a young professional who is organized and enthusiastic to lead our mentorship program. And this is a program where you get to be paired at the undergraduate level with a young professional, and with a young professional to an experienced professional to get more advice and insights and one-on-one mentorship about ways to build and develop your career in a variety of fields. So with that, just want to thank you all again. Really enjoyed connecting with you all, and don't forget to check out our website. Have a good evening.
Thank you.
Thanks very much. Take care.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Thank you for attending, everyone. Have a great evening.